Hello everyone, this is Donnie Davis and I wanted to go over some information about orientation to the Counseling Psychology program. First off, I wanted to go over the schedule. So we have about an hour with me, your other cohort members. There's going to be some other first year students there and also some of the faculty who are around on Thursday. So we'll spend an hour with that group. I'm covering this information so that we have less to cover during that time and we can mostly just connect, hang out with each other, and possibly do some questions and just see what kind of comes up for the group. At 11 o'clock, Fritz will come by, and so he's the staff member who does all of the course scheduling, and so I'll kind of get into this, but there's some flux in the scheduling. We're a small program, and so not all the courses are offered every year, and so you'll end up working closely with Fritz as you're kind of going through the checklist of things that you need to graduate, and he's very responsive and supportive, almost always around, and so you can just go by his office and kind of get to know him. And for many kind of problems or questions, the easiest thing to do is just swing by and check in with him or send him an email, and he is very responsive to email. So at noon, we're going to go to lunch with Dr. Turner and anyone else who is still around. And just continue to start to form relationships, and y'all can talk with Dr. Turner about some of the practicum things that will happen during the first year. The other thing that we'll do is we'll kind of point you in the direction of getting your student ID if you haven't done that already. And we may even be able to go and get your keys cut for the doc lab. So there's a few logistical things that while you're on campus, we'll see if we can get some of those things done. I wanted to frame this presentation with a story. So this is a story about you. Any good story has a hero, that's you. It also has a guide, that's me, and also your doctoral advisor and other people in the program, other students. So you have lots of guides. And then every good story has at least one major challenge. So our story, you getting your doctoral degree, has at least three kind of important challenges that are worth mentioning. So I use a lot of analogies. Many of them I just am not that creative, and I just pick football because I was a college football player. But not everybody played football, so it's probably good to choose other metaphors or analogies. So one that came to mind is last kind of holiday season. One of the Christmas presents that I received was a wine puzzle. I gave a picture of this puzzle, and I used it for like a day or two. But I really couldn't quite figure it out, and so I just kind of forced it, and I ended up breaking, one of these little pieces, and then it wasn't really that useful. So I'm thinking of that analogy because as you go through the program, I'll kind of talk more about this later, but flexibility is probably one of the highest virtues for navigating our program successfully, and you're going to rarely want to have the kind of frustration that I had, and then, if it doesn't work, just apply more force of personality to any kind of problem. Actually, if something's not working, it's probably better to take a step back, self-soothe, and come up with a new approach. And often the new approach that you would come up with you might come up with collaboratively with other people who may have a different way of thinking about the problem. So that's the first of many metaphors or analogies that I'll use in this orientation. So challenge one navigating the courses, I'm just kind of giving you a warning. This is a frustration that I have. Other faculty in the program share a similar frustration. Fritz, who's going to help you the most with this, probably wishes it was a different way. It might be worth pausing briefly to acknowledge that there are some benefits to us not being so responsible for every single course in our curriculum, because the way that we're structured, there's actually a division of responsibilities within the department. And so some of the courses that you need are taught by counselor education and practice faculty. Some of them are taught by school psychology. We even have courses taught by other departments within the college, or even other departments within the broader university. So we rarely pause to think about some of the benefits of not having to carry the full load of some of those things, because the frustrations are much more obvious. But there really are some advantages to us running a lean program. We don't need to carry as many faculty, and we don't have the pressure to accept as many students as we would if we needed to cover all of the faculty salaries with tuition from students. And I know people that are at programs that are structured that way. And there are some significant disadvantages to bringing in classes of 15 to 20 students per year without funding and without tuition remission. But after that brief pause on something kind of positive, let's focus on why this is frustrating. So here's your second analogy. This is kind of like if you were a cowboy and your job was to herd a bunch of cats, into whatever, a cat bin, a corral. So that's what you kind of need to do to graduate. So I've created an Excel sheet where you can I've kind of prioritized all the things that you need to do to graduate. So, you're writing 3 papers for your research, you're taking comps. So there's a number of hurdles that are not course related. You're, completing enough practicum hours so that you can get an internship. You complete an internship. So these are huge time commitments. And then otherwise, you literally have a set of courses that are required of you either by APA, so that we can be credentialed, or by the college so that we can have our program within the college. So there's some course-related taxation that's occurring at the college level that affects you. Let me just go ahead and skip to the punchline. We are going to do this with you during the orientation to practicum course. So Sally and I are going to help you complete an assignment. You'll turn in your program of study. Right now, the catalog is, what the college is using to decide if you're going to graduate. But there are some small details if you were to go to the catalog where we need to kind of walk through and show you exactly what to do in order to fill out the program of study in alignment with not only what the college needs, but also what the program currently requires. And so we'll do that part with you, and then you'll need to continue to, kind of monitor that checklist of courses that you need. I had a friend who his son does Pokemon Go, and so he was in DC and he had his son's phone at APA and he was kind of trying to collect Pokemon. So that's pretty much the game. So if you can view it as kind of fun, a challenge, you'll be less stressed than if you are frustrated and wishing that everything were perfectly aligned and there was no hunt or search involved. Unfortunately, I don't see any time in the near future where we would have enough control or alignment so that we could kind of give you a 4-year plan and here are the exact courses that you need to take, because we have people coming in with different prior training, and there's various configurations of courses that end up being offered, because we have some courses that are every year, some that are every other year, depending on who's teaching the course. Sometimes it gets moved from fall to spring, and so We basically have to work closely with Fritz to align the course plan. What we've started to do is coordinate with Fritz to at least once a year update a sheet that gives his current estimate of when courses will be offered next. And so what you'll end up doing is working closely with your doctoral advisor to continue to monitor a checklist of courses that you need before you graduate. And the reality is, this is not the reason that people end up taking a little bit longer to finish, but it does take more energy than I would want it to. The other warning I would give you is it's not going to be long, and you may pass your advisor in terms of your knowledge of the current challenge here. So before I was teaching the first year course, I somehow made it 8 to 10 years without really having to fully understand exactly what was happening underneath the hood with course scheduling. My students kind of figured it out with support from other students and with the person who was the prior Fritz. Her name was Regina. And so it just kind of happened magically. And so to some extent, we do specialize in our program. Your doctoral advisor's primary job is not to actually navigate courses for you. We actually have a staff person who is paid a good salary to focus on that part of their job and other parts of what they're doing. So there's some specialization that's happening. So it won't be long, and you may actually know more than your advisor about how to navigate, specific details of lining up courses. And that's okay. I am working to get a better sense of this, and I'm working closely with Fritz to try to align this and make it easier, but just be aware, this is tricky. So major challenge 2 to finishing a doctoral degree in our counseling psychology program. Comprehensive exams. We'll talk more about this both in the orientation to practicum course and in the counseling psychology seminar. And those are both courses that kind of provide connective tissue and help you have a sense of how the parts of the program fit together and help you begin to think about your professional identity and your identity as a counseling psychologist. So I really only have one slide here, but I think in a certain way, comps is the apex. It's the most challenging aspect or test of your expertise as a counseling psychologist in training. And the reason why I say that is this is a seated exam. It's a day and a half. So you have about 4 hours for each of the questions on the exam, ethics, theories, and research. And so after you write the question, there's a period of time where you can then prepare for an oral defense. And so in a certain way, this is an aspect of your training that you are doing by yourself and without collaboration. Now, your preparation process is going to be very collaborative, and we're beginning to align the structures of our program so that when you sit for the exam, this isn't the first time that you've experienced a similar challenge. We want to give you a number of situations and tasks that would help you practice the skills that we'll end up evaluating on the comprehensive exams. But this is the place where you have a chance to, one, document that you meet minimal standards of a doctoral candidate. But more than that, it's an opportunity for you to showcase complex and advanced skills that we are hoping to train in graduates of our program. And so when you are answering questions, these are going to end up being very integrative. And after your doctoral advisory committee confirms that you meet minimal standards, there's an opportunity for them to affirm and give you feedback on some of the ways that you have developed excellence and you're beginning to develop expertise as a professional. And your committee can then give some guidance to the kinds of things that you can do with the last year or two of your training to continue to grow in your expertise and get ready for a transition into your first job. In conclusion, the main thing I want you to know now is Dr. Rice is currently coordinating the comps process. And so he and I are working closely. In the last few years, we changed comps to our current structure. It used to be a take-home exam that was around 10 days, and then there was a revision process that ended up taking the rest of the semester. And that was not well aligned with some of the things that we're hoping to do as people get to the end of the program. It was way too costly in time compared to what we were wanting it to do. And so we've calibrated our new comps process to how we want it. And so now what we're doing is making sure that even at the beginning of your program, so that's what's happening now, we're beginning to tell you how to prepare for this so that when you get to the exam, you know that you have trained with the idea that this test is going to come. The next analogy would be if you knew you had to run a marathon at some point. Let's say I knew that I was going to have a marathon over Thanksgiving break. One of the things that would happen is if I had wisdom, I would have a sense that actually I need to start training now because it's not going to be possible to be ready for a marathon at Thanksgiving unless I begin to kind of migrate the training process back to now and I start to develop habits and disciplines so that when I get to that day, I'll be ready. So that brings me to the third challenge, the research requirements of a doctoral degree. So anybody that you talk to will basically give you the same warning. So it's not going to be internship that actually holds you back. The vast majority of people who start an internship finish one. It is possible to fail an internship, but that would typically be some kind of egregious problem with professionalism. So that's not going to be it. It's not going to be courses. What really tends to delay people when you hear of people being ABD, it's mainly that they have not finished their dissertation. And so I just want to talk a little bit about what's needed to navigate the research requirements of our program successfully. So the short version is, in your first year, it may not feel urgent, and it's not really urgent in a certain way, but it's possible to get off to a good start. You're not going to have the same kind of practicum demands that you're going to have after your first year. And we also have a number of layers of additional support, such as the quant course that Dr. Rice teaches, as well as the qualitative course that Dr. Dispenza teaches within the department. So there are a range of supports where there's an opportunity, while it's not urgent, to give some of your best energy to getting off to a good start with your research program. The problem here is not really knowing what to do. I could give you a book that I wrote with Joshua Hook and Daryl Van Tongeren, where we describe what it would mean to get off to a good start in your research program and get off to a good start in developing your leadership as someone who is moving into an identity as a scientist. I have a document with a range of conversations that you could have with your mentor that would help you plan in this area. So I could drop, several hundred pages of knowledge onto you, but knowledge is not actually what will end up being a problem. The problem is doing it. So even today, everyone in this room will know that, regardless of your goals, some people might want to be a professor. Some people might want to go into a VA as a clinician or doing some clinical work and some research. Some people may know, even as today, that they want to go into private practice or work at a university counseling center. There are lots of options post-graduation. But no matter what your career goals are, all of you would want internship to be an experience where you can fully make use of that time. Where you can dedicate the best part of your energy to being trained, because this is when in your clinical training you're going to have the most responsibility entrusted to you, and it's going to be when you have the most training resources dedicated to helping you refine your skill and develop independence as a clinician. So everyone knows that they don't want several other full-time jobs while they're on internship, such as trying to find 15 to 20 hours a week to work on a dissertation. And the process of trying to find a job also occurs during that time, postdocs or other first positions. And if you are delayed on your dissertation work, the process of finding a job gets harder because people are wary of giving a job to someone who may not graduate at the end of their time. So I'm trying to kind of go ahead and describe the significant challenges. So everyone knows about this. You're finding out about it even before orientation starts. Yet, I can tell you honestly, in the 12 years that I've been here so far, I really can only think of one or two students who have successfully defended their entire dissertation before they started internship. And so why is that? If this is what, no matter what your career track would be, it ends up happening, why is it that so many people end up drifting into something that's less than ideal? And the truth is, this is a process that involves a lot of steps. It involves a developmental process, and it always takes longer than you think it will. And so as much as people kind of wave their arms and say this is really, really important, make sure no matter what your goals are to do this first and get it done as soon as you can, it's actually kind of hard to pull off that wisdom. And so, I definitely want to kind of pause and give us a chance to kind of sit with that. You'll hear other students who are at varying levels of that kind of process of seeing this deadline that right now is a long way away. But your greatest challenge in a hero to your story of getting your degree, I'm telling you, is you have 3 papers to write. So it will probably end up being, if the average paper is about 30 pages, you have about a 90-page term paper that's going to be due. And ideally, you would turn it in about 4 years. But if you miss that 4-year train, you can turn it in a number of times after that. But there starts to be a price tag on each year that kind of passes. So in academia, a 9-month salary right now is probably something like $80,000. And so that would be 75% of what it would be possible to make in a year. So we're talking about potentially a $100,000 price tag for every year that goes by where that term paper of 90 pages doesn't get submitted on time. So this is a significant challenge. So I want to just contrast the most polarized 2 versions of what this could look like, just so you have a sense of the range. Let me describe the best case scenario first. So the best case scenario from my perspective, if you were just going to aim for perfection or almost perfect, would be that in your first year, when you do not have heavy demands on practicum, you would make serious project on the first 2 papers. So if I were going to give you behavioral markers to aim for your pre-dis, what I would suggest is that you find access to a data set that you would have by the end of your first semester. So you could design a study and collect the data within a semester, or you could find an existing data set. Then by the end of the second semester, I would work with your advisor to write the method and results section of your pre-dissertation. That's very feasible. There's not a single doctoral advisor in this department who could not support you if that was your strong goal. And so then you would basically go into the summer with the part of the paper that is the most challenging to do by yourself. That would be done, and you would have the rest of the summer to kind of work on your introduction and discussion for that paper and finish that up. But really, the ball is in your court at that point, and for many of you, the skills of kind of finishing up writing is something that's more accessible. The part that can be more challenging is just all the details and skill of writing the crux of the paper, so the method and the result section. A second goal that I would give you is, while you have lower demands on practicum, I would give you the goal of learning about what's involved in writing a chapter 1 and doing a systematic literature review. And I would start collecting articles, aiming for something like 15 to 25 articles in an area. If it gets a lot bigger than that, you're just adding work. If it's a lot smaller than 15, there may not be enough there to substantiate a significant contribution for that paper. And if you were able to find those articles and create a summary table describing the participants in each article, the measures, the independent variables and the dependent variables, as well as a summary of the primary findings. And if you also wrote out kind of the methodology section following PRISMA guidelines, and so you'll hear more about what these things mean later, but if you were able to get past that part of the process, then you would be within striking distance of finishing your systematic literature review, and you would have also completed a couple of the steps that are really hard to predict how long they will take. For example, picking a topic, narrowing the scope of your topic, and also just identifying the primary literature within the area and making decisions about inclusion and exclusion criteria. So if I knew that you were done to that part of the process, I could fairly accurately estimate how long it would take you to finish that paper, because you had done a few of the things that make it unpredictable. So let me give you another analogy just to kind of get a sense of this. So when I was, before I became a psychologist, I worked for a home building company, and the process of building a house actually is somewhat similar to project management on working on a dissertation or a pre-dissertation. So if I'm working on a house and it's raining really hard and the foundation was supposed to go in, but it actually takes me 3 weeks longer, my dad actually made an Excel sheet that would automatically readjust the time that it would take to finish a house, best case scenario, because of that delay in one step. So working on your research requirements works similarly. So you may not know it, but even as you start the program, there is a clock on these 3 projects. And if it takes 2 to 3 years to get started on your systematic literature review, then that's when your clock kind of starts and kind of moves to the next step. So one of the things that I'm advising is, go ahead and do some of the things that may take longer to do and may have more noise in predicting how long they will take, while you have the luxury of years of time, so that when you start to get busier and you pick up additional roles and responsibilities, there is less of your timeline ahead of you. And so to kind of finish out that analogy, when you're building a house, once the roof gets put on and the walls of the house are put on, it's much more predictable how long it will take to finish the house because weather doesn't actually affect the timeline as much. So there can still be delays, but some of the things that are beyond your control are actually controlled for once you get past a certain phase. And so I'm suggesting a similar principle when you try to navigate these 3 papers. So while you have the luxury of time, make significant progress, get as far as you can no matter what your professional goals are. And what you're buying yourself is more flexibility, and you're buying yourself more control over your timeline later in the process. So back to our story of the ideal, the telos student, the person who is almost perfect in their progression. This person is over 50% done with their research requirements by the end of summer of their first year because they invested that first year wisely. And so in their second year, what they would do is they would design a study with their advisor that met the requirements of publication in a top journal. So Journal of Counseling Psychology, or they might aim for Journal of Personality and Social Psychology or Journal of Positive Psych. So the importance of this goal is this is good preparation for comps, particularly the research question of comps. So one of the things that you need to know to do well in comps is what are the publishing standards in your area. And so if you end up designing a study during this second year and trying to collect your data, then you're doing things that are going to help you prepare for comps. And then the other thing is you would be collecting data that you might be able to include in your chapter 2 of your dissertation. So under a certain scenario, by the end of your second year, if all went really, really well, you might have a data set that you could talk to your committee and they might agree that that data set would be appropriate for your dissertation. So you're coming in possibly 2 years ahead of your construction schedule, to kind of stick with that metaphor. And this would be almost perfect. So at this point, this perfect student is sitting pretty well, because after a 2-year period, there's a chance to decide how to really invest training and time in a way that aligns with professional goals. So let's, imagine someone who's wanting to work in a VA setting. They could dedicate 90% of their energy to doing the kinds of things that would help them compete for an internship in the VA system. So, working at a practicum, doing lots of assessments, getting networked within APA with other psychologists that work within the VA. Because there's such a strong start on the dissertation project, and that is well in hand, then it would really free up energy later on, and there would be a lot less anxiety about uncontrollables that could affect graduation because there had been a strong start on the 3 research projects that are required. If someone wanted to go into academia, at that point they could shift their attention to publishing as much as possible, because one of the primary rate limiting steps is going to be how many publications do you have, what's the quality of publications that you have on your CV when you hit the job market. And nowadays, oftentimes it's necessary to do a postdoc just to kind of get those numbers up, because many people taking their first tenure track position have somewhere between 8 to 20 or even 25 publications by the time they get that first job. It really just depends how active their research team was, and also how long they were in their doctoral program or how long they served on a postdoc. And so there's quite a range in terms of where people are in the market. And so that person would have 2 years to really specialize and focus on their research and writing. We can also imagine someone who wanted to work at a university counseling center and really, if they were honest, didn't really plan on writing a fourth paper. These 3 papers were enough. They wanted to be trained well. They wanted to have skills to evaluate research effectively, but really 3 is good enough for a career. And even for this person, this would still be an ideal, because at that point in their training, they could come up with a plan to efficiently finish those 3 papers. There's possibly a data set that is aligned and could be used for Chapter 2. It had been designed with the Doctoral Advisory Committee. It's possible to use existing data, so that committee might be inclined to allow that data set to be used for the dissertation. And so now there's a couple of years to essentially write up that paper. So part of why this is ideal is we've controlled for some of the uncontrollables, some of the things that can make these 3 projects take longer than expected, such as running into difficulties with data collection, running into unexpected challenges with data analysis and needing to get support and help, having changes in your committee. These are all things that can be disruptive, and under time pressure, if there's only 3 months to finish a dissertation, if anything goes wrong, then the schedule doesn't work, and it may cost a year of time. So I think I've painted a picture of how a YS student would kind of potentially navigate this 4-year due date on their work. I can also kind of quickly describe the worst case scenario. So technically within our program, it would be possible to wait until August of your 4th year to finish your pre-dissertation. So the reason why I say that is we do require that you finish your pre-dissertation before you sit for comps, and you have to sit for comps before you can apply for internship and propose your prospectus, and you have to propose your dissertation before you can apply for internship. And so under the worst case scenario, all of those deadlines hit in your 4th year, or it could hit even in a 5th year. So if all of those major requirements of the program, I mentioned several challenges. So if comps, if your research papers, all 3 of them, if all of that hits at pretty much the same 3-month deadline, then that is a tremendous amount of work. And honestly, there's a developmental piece that tends to take time that can make it almost impossible to kind of thread the needle on all of those requirements within a 3-month period of time. But we certainly have seen people kind of end up in that gauntlet, and it can be done. All of your doctoral advisor and other faculty will support you if you ended up in that situation, but everyone knows that that's not ideal. What has happened is somehow the knowledge of what would be ideal didn't get translated into practice, and so there ended up being kind of a bottleneck that happened toward the end of training. So you can kind of see in the story that I'm telling, this is the major challenge to any of our heroes. And in particular, what I would wish for you and hope for you, I kind of pulled a mood meter. There's an expert at Yale who uses this to kind of chart emotion. So for training to work at its best, large portions of time would get spent in the yellow and green areas. So this is kind of charted by positive emotion and then high and low energy. So this yellow quadrant, this is what it feels like when you have high intrinsic motivation, you get into flow states, and this can sustain pretty significant amounts of work. The work feels meaningful. And then, as you're working really, really hard, you're probably needing to establish periods of rest and recovery. So you're building in at least a day a week where you're able to kind of be in a green zone. Each day you're probably building in some green zone, some rest and recovery. And then of course, life happens. So there are periods of, there's exams every semester, there's due dates, there are periods of red, threat, stress. There are periods of blue, sadness, loss, feeling lonely, lower energy, negative states. But in a certain way, what we would hope for you is that even though there is a significant journey and challenge that's being encountered, that one of the things that you learn to do is encounter this challenge and test not as being overwhelming and more than you can handle, but actually you experience an increasing sense of, I can do this, I can handle this. And if y'all take Dr. Rice's course on stress, that's one of the primary theories of what causes stress is, one, there's a sense of threat that causes stress. And then a secondary appraisal is that there's an appraisal that I don't have the resources to handle the challenge that I'm facing. When people stay in a zone where they experience challenges as something that's going to help them grow, and where they, with support of others, are going to be able to rise to the challenge, those things are actually invigorating, and they begin to grow a sense of confidence, a positive type of confidence. And this is really what we want for all of our graduates, is that by the end of their training, they had experienced support within our program to rise to challenges that they would have never been able to do before. And they would be able to take that with them to some of the new things that they try to do, knowing that they had, kind of overcome significant challenges within their doctoral program. So the logic is something like, if I did that, if I rose to the challenge there, then I'm definitely willing to take on new challenges and try new things. So it's at this point in the story, you're probably feeling significant narrative tension. I might have even put some people in the red zone, and I hope not. We haven't really even gotten started. But we do have to honestly look at what's ahead. We have years and years to do it, and you have lots of support, but there are several challenges, and honestly, several of them are a little bit distracting. It's not going to be the courses. It's not really going to be comps. It's not going to be getting practicum hours. You'll notice I didn't even mention that. People get their hours. They get to 500 hours. We have excellent practicum training. As long as I've been here, we have 100% match rate. Those aren't going to be the problems. Really, this last one is the significant barrier, and so I want to kind of get it in front of you right away. So now let me just say a few things about how to approach this challenge. How could you stay more in the yellow, more in the green, in terms of just a steady basis of your life? How can you flourish while you're in your doctoral training program? Again, there's part of me that wishes all of you had already taken Dr. Rice's stress course, because there's some common language that I would want to appeal to. But one of the major factors of whether you kind of stay in this state of viewing challenges as something that you have the resources to deal with, it has to do with your relationships. And I'm going to talk more about what I mean by that. But your job this fall is to nest, to bond, to grow your roots. We could use any number of metaphors, but I don't know if it was similar for you when you went away to undergrad. For me, I moved away from home, and I hadn't really done that before. And I felt really lonely, really, not just for a year, but it took me a couple of years to really feel relationally grounded. But after I did that for the first time, I kind of had a better sense of what was needed, what I needed. And it started to be easier, and it started to not take as much time. That's what we wish for you, is that you start to feel relationally grounded and embedded. so that it doesn't take you a year or two to start to feel like what you need relationally, but it actually starts to kind of feel that way within 6 months to a year. I think it's a little bit different for everyone, and it would be okay if it even takes longer for that to happen. But I think that's a big part of what could kind of move you into a zone where the work feels energizing and you're having regular flow experiences, and it feels like the pace of work has room for you to take breaks, take days off, have fun, have a life outside of the department. These are things that you can kind of get in a rhythm of sustainable work. On our first day of seminar, this is actually what everyone's going to be talking about, is, trying to give you some tips or pointers or different ideas on how to think about the process and start to kind of ground yourself. One picture that kind of came to mind to me was I listened to a lot of podcasts, and I remember listening to a podcast about someone who really cared a lot about the environment, and it turns out like wolf populations are really essential to entire ecologies, and so one of the things the environmentalists were doing is trying to make sure that there was a healthy balance within a larger system. And I always found it kind of fascinating, the chain reaction that you really wouldn't necessarily predict when there's some sort of disruption, like, the wolf population is totally depleted, and so that therefore, causes another animal to grow too big, too many people in the population, and then you end up with massive erosion problems. So in a certain way, that is how a department works. So I kind of have a slide where I'm pointing out we're in a larger ecology. So there are students, there are different cohorts of students. You have your doctoral advisor, which is kind of your most direct source of support, but then you also have program faculty, there's departmental faculty. Our department operates within a broader college. And so in a certain way, you are getting oriented to not just what is it that you have to do, but you're existing within a broader ecology. So I wanted to give you a picture of, kind of what it looks like to stay in the yellow versus, almost getting underwater with your intrinsic motivation and starting to feel kind of signs of burnout, cynicism, having trouble with managing conflict, all of these kind of things. So as stress levels increase, if you are not feeling enough support relationally across the board, across all of the different areas of your relationships, then what will happen is you will start to perceive some of these threats, like, what if I don't graduate on the time I want to? What if I don't get a job? There are lots of things about the future that are unpredictable and not completely within your control, but, we're relating to this uncertainty in life. And then we can start to get underwater of, do I have enough resources? I'm not sure that I do. So doubt creeps in there, stress goes up. And then what starts to happen is it actually starts to negatively affect our relationships. So we start to say, well, why am I not feeling like I have enough? And it starts to put strain on, well, maybe my fellow students should be helping me more. Maybe my advisor should be helping me more. Maybe the program, the department, the college, the university. And there can be a growing sense of loneliness. And I mean, if you think about it in terms of attachment, there's a sense of fundamental needs not being met. So this slide shows a general architecture of the relational web that I think is going to be most crucial to us trying to support you in this process. So your doctoral advisor and the team and the culture that they promote, that is where a significant portion of your relational needs are going to be met as you go through the challenges of the program. We've also put in place several things during the first year. So one is orientation to practicum, where you'll be meeting with your cohort on a weekly basis, and that'll be time. I teach that course right now, so you'll have time as a cohort with me every week, and there's content in that course that we're covering, making sure that you're ready to start your first doctoral placement. But there's also connective tissue and a relational process that we're trying to promote within that course. A second area of support is for your first 3 years, you'll be in the Counseling Psychology Seminar once a month. And again, a big part of that group is a place where you're going to have connection both with me as the program coordinator and also with other students. And this is part of what it means for you to not just go through this checklist by yourself, but to have a larger web of relationships that would make things easier and would also offer support. So the main thing that I want to point out is that isn't enough. We want to give you lots of support, but for the people who really thrive in our doctoral program, they also ground themselves in communities outside of Georgia State. They develop strong friendships. They stay connected to their family. And part of the reason why that's so important is we are a system. And sometimes, we actually pick up on, no matter how emotionally mature we are, we pick up on the emotions of others. So if others in our cohort are really, really stressed, it's going to be harder for us to feel at ease if we don't also have other relationships that we can rely on that are outside of this system. And so I would give a quick plug in that regard. And then the other thing I would say, at some point, you'll probably have some introduction to like ACT, acceptance commitment therapy. One of the key ideas there is that psychological flexibility is something that helps people flourish. And so I would kind of plant that seed, remember that as you kind of go through the next few years. So one of the things that I would encourage you to aim for is a place where when you encounter stress, there's something inside you that orients to how is it that I can be less reactive and more flexible in my way of thinking about what's happening and engaging different situations, because that will ground you. You'll kind of be in touch with both what's happening inside you and what's happening around you. You can stay curious, and you can also maintain a flexibility in the way that you react. So instead of just kind of doing whatever came first, whatever comes to your mind, there's time to pause and consider a range of options and kind of choose something that's most in alignment with your values and the direction you're heading, and not necessarily the first thing that you kind of feel pulled to do in the moment, and especially under stress. In my story, so I really your doctoral advisor will kind of have their own way of framing what it would mean for you to kind of rise to the challenge. The language that I like is the idea of expertise development. And so actually in the Orientation to Practicum course, we'll read a book on expertise development. And so you'll definitely have more of a chance to hear some of my ideas. But the bottom line is, for you to become really, really strong in your clinical skills, your writing and research skills, there is a cost to training. I mentioned that I played football. We didn't just play 10 games per year. We actually trained every day all year, and there's a specific training process that we've learned is associated with people getting better. A lot of people will plateau if they don't engage training in a very specific kind of way. And the short version, this isn't going to be too surprising, but the short version of what that process involves is it involves you having dedicated periods of time where you try to do your very best. And then you add to that a component where someone who has more expertise than you do, and oftentimes it's a group of people, you end up getting feedback on what you did so that it really starts to train your imagination. Things don't happen in the real world until they first kind of happen in your imagination. And so part of what's happening as you're training is your ways of thinking about what you're trying to do when you're writing a paper or when you're seeing a client. Your ways of thinking are being refined and trained, and it's actually dramatically enhancing your short-term memory and the power of what you can process. And so as you are engaging training, part of what you're doing is finding opportunities to practice your skills and then also engage the people around you in the system who can give you feedback on what you're doing. So, part of the reason I mention this is although we want you to flourish, we actually would like you to be generally experiencing mood states like the yellow zone or the green zone. That's not our primary purpose as a training program. Our primary purpose as a training program is to train you as psychologists and help you develop expertise. This is a scientist practitioner training program. You can probably anticipate one of the parts that starts to get challenging as you go through the program. We have different faculty who have different areas of expertise. And so if you wanted to be the very best play therapist that you could be at the end of your training, one of the things that you would do is you would dedicate as much time as you could to practicing those skills, and also you would actually work really hard to make sure that when you were practicing your play therapy skills, you were getting feedback from the highest trained people in that area so that you're accelerating a learning process. So the drawback is that you can't actually give your best energy to everything all at once. And so part of what you're going to be doing with your advisor is coming up with a strategy of giving priority to developing different skills at different times. So to give you kind of an illustration, in my training, my advisor, when I started to work with him, he had written something like 35 books, 300 articles, and I had really never gotten a lot of feedback on my writing. And so what I realized pretty soon was if I wanted to be a writer, Ev could probably teach me to write. But once I left for internship, I might not have the same access to him. And so part of what I did was I structured my time on practicum so that I was giving, somewhere around 2 days or a day and a half. And when I was at practicum, I gave it my best energy and I gave it my full attention. But I tried to leave with all my notes done and everything in order so that the rest of my time that I had allocated to training, I could give to working on my writing and getting as much feedback from Ev as I could. So that was me trying to see if I could line up with an opportunity to be a faculty member, and you know the end of that story. Here I am. But really, you have the same challenge of deciding what do you want to give your best energy to. And in a certain way, everybody that you talk to, when you come to them for mentoring, they're going to assume that at least while you're with them, you're giving them your best energy. And in a certain way, people who really like training, in a certain way, they actually there's going to be a certain draw for you to invest more and more of your energy in what they have to offer. So if you're doing good work, they'll entrust you with more responsibility and you'll have more chance to build your skills. So this is part of what's a little bit tricky, and it's a little bit unspoken about what's happening in a doctoral program, because when you go to work on your research, there's a pull to give that a certain priority. And then when you go to Kennesaw for a year, they're going to occupy significant portions of your time, and they actually have a structure where they can occupy up to 25 to 30 hours of your time. And part of what they're doing, that's good training. They're occupying your commitment, whether you knew it or not. They went ahead and booked your time, made sure that they get a certain level of priority. So that kind of hits the expertise piece. Now I want to talk a little bit about what it would mean for you to be relationally connected with enough support, because I think this is another thing that's implicit, but I actually want to see if I can explain it so that it wouldn't necessarily take a while for y'all to kind of figure out this is how it works. So when people are generally happy in our program, one of the things that has probably happened is they have probably found a strong relationship with their doctoral advisor and with the team of people that's working with that advisor. And so an analogy here would be, think about a campfire. So if it's warm, it might be cold outside, that dissertation's still waiting for you, but there's a campfire and it's warm. And so a strong advisor and a strong team provides a certain amount of warmth. some people might wish that at the department level or at the program level, there was kind of one big campfire. And I mean, campfire is like belonging, a sense of inclusion, a sense of close relationship and deep friendship. Sometimes there's a sense of shared values and commitments and convictions. So some people might wish for that sense of belonging at the bigger group level. But I can say, I think in our department, we actually have the equivalent of a lot of small campfires. And, the problem with trying to have one big campfire is if you had enough people, there would be some people who were close to it, some people who were further away. If you're following this metaphor. And so you might have to build the fire bigger and bigger and bigger just to kind of deal with people trying to get close enough, blah, 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 blah. So there's conflict when there's an attempt with a very large group to have enough cohesion and similarity that everyone would feel as much closeness and warmth as they would want. Instead, when people are kind of staying in the yellow and the green, I think what happens is we actually have a vibrant community of cultures. So it's not that counseling psychology as a program has one culture. We actually are a combination of different subcultures that exist within the different teams. And those teams aren't really controlled by advisors. It's really emergent from the leadership that occurs within each of those teams. I'd love to talk more about this with you, but there's a book by Putnam. He has a whole line of work on how individualism within the U.S. has led people to feel more lonely and they're less engaged in various communities. APA is currently experiencing this, where the average age of members is getting pretty close to the retirement age in many divisions. And so one of the things that I'm trying to kind of remind people of when they come in is you do need to be embedded. This is not the kind of thing to try to do alone and just muscle through individually. You will need the warmth of community, and what is most likely is that you're going to find one or several strong sources of community as you're here within the program. And that might come from your team. It could come from your cohort. It actually might come from subgroups of people across different programs. We don't try to dictate where you end up getting your needs met. But the main warning is it is important that you have a sense of connection and support. And it's kind of different from undergrad or a master's program. There's a shift in initiative and responsibility. And so it is your primary responsibility that you have the resources that you need to engage this training program. The other thing I'll mention, I kind of put this on a 2x2, and this may be delving further into just some of my particular interest. I study virtues, and I'm interested in cultural humility and what's involved for people to earn trust across different groups. So I'm sharing a little bit here just to kind of signal that I would love to hear more about how different people think this might work. But in the research book that Josh and Gerald and I wrote, I did draft a chapter describing what does it mean for you to kind of start to look to find community during your first year. And I used some of my own experience just to kind of illustrate that when you come to a space like the program level, if I were kind of looking at this 2x2, what we're generally wanting to do is help people learn to be almost like in ambassador mode. They're aiming for a type of cultural span where it's assumed that there is room for a range of cultural views and different values, and that actually could be challenging because we may have areas of disagreement on some things that are very important. We may not have complete solidarity or similarity of values, but part of what we're all committed to learning is a cultural span and an ability to bridge and build trust across relationships. And part of why we do that is so that in the future, when there are problems that need to be solved, we might be in a position to help come up with ways of moving forward that would be more effective than might happen if conflict led to polarization and fear and other psychological processes kind of left us with inferior options because of what can happen with group polarization. So if you look at my picture, what I'm articulating is kind of on the y-axis. We're assuming that people have a broad range of where they are identity-wise. So if I use kind of religion as an example, some people may feel pretty at peace with their community that they grew up in and want to stay grounded. So that would be kind of down, grouping, bonding, connecting, grounding. And then other people might have a sense of what they want primarily based on what they don't want. So imagine someone who had a father who let them down in specific ways, and so as they become a father, they try to basically not make certain mistakes, and so the ideals are partially defined by a sense of what one is hoping to avoid. And so part of why I mention this is it can kind of relieve pressure on a space that's trying to promote cultural span, a certain type of cultural humility. If we acknowledge that in order to do the spanning process and the process of learning to build trust with others, we still do have to stay grounded. So for example, I was raised in a conservative Christian family. My mom homeschooled us for religious reasons. And so there's part of me, even though I've changed and, have a different way of thinking about my faith, and I'm not the same as I was when I was 14 years old. There's still part of me that is seeking ways of staying connected, not just with my family. Of course I'm going to stay connected with my family, but I also want to be the kind of person that has integrity and can earn trust with communities that I was connected to when I was young. But I'm also trying to grow my span and connect with communities that I really didn't even have exposure to when I was younger. So over time, I've started to realize that a lot of the different theories within counseling psychology articulate different versions of this same process where it takes work to stay culturally connected and have a sense of integrity to the person that one was growing up, but then also seeking to grow and learn and become the kind of person that one hopes to be. That's a whole process. And if I was going to kind of give you one word of encouragement in thinking about that process, most people don't get everything that they need from one mentor or one group. And so, for example, for me, being interested in religion and spirituality and its connection with other identities, I have to seek out 3 or 4 different communities to kind of get some of the different pieces that I need from each. So the way that this insight can relieve a little bit of pressure is it can give room to draw from the strengths of different groups that you're a part of without overburdening those groups or relationships with more than they can sustain. So kind of another way to illustrate this is with our master's programs. Oftentimes students would come in and they were getting sold hard on how awesome it is to be part of a cohort of 30 people. And oftentimes people who are helping with recruitment, they're describing how awesome this is. And it is. It's great. Feeling connected and bonded feels really good. On the other hand, when y'all take your group counseling class, one of the things that you'll learn is as groups get somewhere around 8 to 12 people, it's almost impossible for group cohesion to stay really, really strong as the group gets bigger. And so there start to be subgroups and subdivisions, and sometimes that's fine. I kind of mentioned the metaphor of many little fires. But if someone has idealized the idea that there's going to be cohesion at the big group level with 30 people, it also sets up a potential for disappointment because there's a desire to kind of make that group warm enough to sustain, cohesion with 30 people. Maybe that makes sense, maybe it doesn't, but that would be my attempt to kind of describe the relational system and give some ideas of how to start to build connection and find support that would help you sustain your work over the next few years. I'll say a few other things more quickly. So you might as well start to get a sense of what it's like to work with your advisor. The most direct thing to do is just ask your advisor questions, and there's probably 90% that they could just tell you directly. And then, as with any person, there's probably 10% that you need to hear other people on the team describe the culture of the team to you and get a sense of what kind of things are true but implicit and often unsaid. But I kind of gave you one illustration. So you could probably chart your advisor somewhere between, I have a picture of kind of a butler or someone who's just totally customer service. What can I do to meet your needs? And then the second person is a blacksmith. And the metaphor there is apprenticeship. And so the expectation is we're here to train, we're working hard, this is really hard work. Mental toughness is the highest virtue, hard work is the highest virtue. And so let's get to work. So on that spectrum, I would put most of our faculty somewhere in the middle, but there's variation around that. But the bottom line is we are all here to train. We all do care about having high standards, and we all want you to develop as a professional. And we're wanting to appropriately calibrate that with you having enough support so that you can engage your training and end up becoming strong in the ways that you want to and in alignment with your professional goals. But our primary job is training. Our primary job is not customer service. We are serving, and we view ourselves as part of a larger network that is serving society in an important way. But part of what we're acculturating you into is that you would start to view yourself as having a key service role, and you're developing your skills and gifts so that you have something to offer other people and something to help, whether that's advancing knowledge through science, whether that's promoting flourishing through your clinical practice. Another thing I'll say quickly is I'll remind you, systems are perfectly designed to, what comes to mind? So if you studied for the EPPP, the completion of this sentence is they're perfectly designed to maintain the status quo. So I have a picture here of a bunch of yellow jackets or wasps or whatever trying to get out of a jar. So one of the things that we share in common in this program is that everyone is interested in what it means to effectively engage within systems, whether you're a leader within the system or whether you're working in a role to try to help a system develop more flexibility and grow in a way that would help it be more aligned with its purpose. So really all of our faculty have ideas on how they approach this, and it's fairly contextualized to the different systems that they're working within. But I wanted to say a few things just about what it would look like for you to effectively engage within this system. I would point you strongly towards optimizing trust. What could happen if trust ends up getting low for you with anyone, and I'll give you a couple of examples later, it will end up undermining any attempts that you would have to try to influence the system positively. And systems do have something kind of equivalent to an immune system to curb selfishness. So, we belong in groups. We give and we sacrifice, and we try to benefit the greater good. That's part of what it means to belong to a group. And then we also draw. We have withdrawals from a group. A group can provide us with resources. It can provide us with protection. It can provide us with relational connection, and belonging and a sense of purpose. This book by Ed Friedman kind of describes a systems view of leading kind of in this way. But so if you wanted to talk more about my view of what this looks like, read that book and let's set up coffee. But what I would say is a quintessential evidence of that you're building trust in the way that I think would be effective within this department would be how you treat every single person that you interact with. And I can tell you one person that it's absolutely essential for you to treat with high respect and high responsiveness, and that's Yolandi Parker. She's in charge of the stipends and the money for the doctoral program. And you may not know it yet, but if her interactions with you are not characterized by professionalism, high responsiveness, getting her what she needs as quickly as you can, it will negatively affect your reputation, potentially in the whole department, because the staff talk to each other and then the staff talk to everybody else in the department. And so everything would then get harder for you to do if you started to lose trust, even in minor interactions with our staff. And so you've probably heard people talk about like someone interviewing for a major leadership position and the way that they kind of handle minor interactions with people in the organization has a pretty big say on whether that person gets hired. That's true of us here. And part of the reason why is we're interconnected. We wouldn't be able to do what we're doing without everyone kind of doing their part. And so even though I don't have a whole lot to do with what's happening with tuition waivers and, processing GRAs, the stipends for those, it is absolutely essential that I support our staff, or I wouldn't be able to do many of the other things that I do. So I want to make that very explicit. That's how everything works in our department. We are interconnected, and how you treat anyone is how you treat everyone. And so I would just kind of start us with a model of aiming at promoting as much trust as possible across any of the relationships that you have in the department. If you end up having something happen where trust is negatively affected by an interaction, our goal is still to do what we can. We shouldn't trust people more than they earn, but we're going to do what we can to maintain higher trust within our system, because that affects the quality of life of not just us, but everyone else within our department. And then the last thing I'll say is I just wanted to kind of give an example of a project where we played around with shifting the dynamics in a system. So, I'm in the area of religion and spirituality, and for really like almost 20 years, people have talked about how there ought to be more training, better training. As I've kind of gotten into counseling psych, there's a similar idea really across a range of cultural identities that there needs to be stronger and better training, and things would be infused across the curriculum. And for a long time, I noticed that many people were kind of saying the same things, no matter where it was, but we were kind of stuck. Like the conversation was about the same as it was before. So when things are stuck, one of the things that's stuck is how we're viewing the problem. And for anything to change, part of what has to change is we have to have some kind of new insight. It may not be exactly right, but our idea of the problem does have to change before we're going to try new things and potentially have new flexibility and new options. So here's an example of how I had a shift in this area. I realized that in our department, there really was no room to add new courses. If we added another course on religion and spirituality, or on racial identity, or on sexual and gender minorities, like there wasn't enough room in the curriculum to add even one new course, much less 4 or 5 or 6 new courses. But what I started to realize is that advanced skills in terms of conceptualization could actually occur later in the training program. So when people are doing supervision and, so you're doing supervision for a number of years, after graduation, you continue to get consultation. And so I started to see that there were peer consultation groups that people would use to develop more advanced skills. And so instead of focusing on ways of affecting the curriculum at the beginning, one way that would generate more flexibility and leverage would be to change the way of thinking about how to integrate multicultural training later in the curriculum. If y'all were to listen to the orientation for the Happy Lab in our leadership seminar in positive psychology, we give a number of other examples where we basically tried to come up with a theory of change systemically. We had a different view of the problem. It led to a different area of leverage or investment, and we experimented with that new idea. And really, I would say in every instance where we've put serious thought into kind of changing our perspective and experimenting with a different way of engaging something at the department level, we've had success initiating change. And so part of what's happening is we're changing our view of the problem, and we're also generating enough energy by involving a group of people that it's able to get past some of the pushback that happens, which is just systems being systems and doing their job of maintaining the status quo, which honestly isn't always a bad thing. If things change too much too quickly, it would be kind of like if you're driving a car down the road and instead of turning a little bit to the right, you just ran a car into the ditch. That's not what's needed when you're driving, and it's also not really a good sign of leadership if things are swinging wildly from one ditch to the other. So I'll kind of stop there. I've hit a number of kind of insights based on a little over 10 years that I've been in the department. I think this is a really wonderful place to train as a psychologist. I think that we have world-class faculty both within our program and in the department. There is quite a bit of expertise in terms of people's skill as researchers, as clinicians, as people interested in supporting and engaging different systems, whether it be schools, churches, other professional organizations. So I'm really not worried about the kind of competence that you would develop if you gave your best energy within this training structure. I think the piece that is on you and your cohort to kind of determine is how do you surround yourself with the kinds of relationships so that you can really use your experience in this program to refine your skills, because there are parts of it that are hard and there are parts that you'll need help and support from other people because it's much harder to try to do things kind of single-handedly. So I'll end there. In the slide deck, I've got a few other slides just orienting to where things are. There's some stuff that I've put in a team page, and I'll start to orient you to that. In seminar, a lot of the forms that are needed to graduate, we collect in iCollege. Some of that stuff may change a little bit from year to year, so I'm not going to go over that right now. We'll kind of go over that on Thursday. So the last thing I want to leave you with is we're really excited that you're here. We're looking forward to spending some time with you before things start to get busier. And we really do want to do anything that we can within the first semester to help you start to form the kind of relationships where you can get into habits of life where this starts to feel like a home away from home, and where you feel like you're starting to form strong friendships, not only with other students and faculty, but even within the broader community. So you'll see that the way we're organizing our time over the first few weeks is designed to help you begin to trust that some of those things will happen naturally because we have a structure and we have a plan to help you start to do that.